The Israel-Palestine conflict, a comprehensive overview, historical context. The Israel-Palestine conflict is one of the most complex and enduring geopolitical disputes in modern history. Its roots trace back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when nationalist movements among Jews and Arabs began to clash over the territory of Palestine. Jewish migration to Palestine increased significantly due to persecution in Europe, culminating in the Holocaust during World War II. Following the war, international sympathy for Jewish suffering led to the 1947 United Nations Partition Plan, which proposed separate Jewish and Arab states. In 1948, the State of Israel was declared, leading to the First Arab-Israeli War. Neighboring Arab nations rejected the partition and fought Israel, but Israel emerged victorious, expanding its territory beyond the UN's proposed borders. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians became refugees, a pivotal moment that continues to fuel grievances today. Key events and escalations. 1. 1967 Six-Day War. Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. This event solidified Israeli control over Palestinian territories and heightened tensions. 2. First Intifada 1987-1993, a Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation marked by widespread protests and violence. 3. Oslo Accords 1993, a milestone in peace efforts. These agreements established the Palestinian Authority and envisioned a two-state solution. However, subsequent failures to implement key provisions deepened mistrust. 4. Second Intifada 2000-2005, triggered by Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon's visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This uprising was far bloodier, with suicide bombings and military crackdowns. 5. Gaza wars. Repeated conflicts between Israel and Hamas, the ruling authority in Gaza, have resulted in massive casualties, destruction, and worsening humanitarian crises. Current developments. 2024, the conflict remains unresolved, with frequent escalations. 2024 Gaza clashes. Recent weeks have seen intensified Israeli airstrikes in Gaza following Hamas rocket attacks. Civilians on both sides continue to bear the brunt of the violence. West Bank violence. Israeli settlers and Palestinians have engaged in violent confrontations, exacerbating tensions. Humanitarian crisis. Gaza's blockaded economy has led to dire living conditions, with limited access to clean water, electricity, and medical supplies. November 2024 update. The most recent escalation began after the death of 3 Palestinian teenagers during an Israeli raid in Jenin, triggering widespread protests and retaliatory rocket fire from Gaza. Israeli forces launched a series of airstrikes targeting Hamas's infrastructure, resulting in significant casualties, including women and children. Meanwhile, settler violence in the West Bank has reached unprecedented levels, prompting calls for international intervention. Role of key powers. United States. The U.S. has historically been Israel's strongest ally, providing billions in military aid annually. Successive American administrations have supported Israel's right to self-defense while calling for a two-state solution. However, U.S. credibility as a mediator has been questioned due to its perceived pro-Israel stance. The Biden administration, like its predecessors, has condemned violence but struggled to broker lasting peace. Recent developments have seen the U.S. trying to mediate a ceasefire in Gaza while simultaneously facing criticism for vetoing UN resolutions that condemn Israeli settlement expansions. Domestic divisions in the U.S. Congress reflect growing scrutiny of unconditional military aid to Israel, particularly among progressive lawmakers. Iran is a staunch supporter of Palestinian groups, particularly Hamas and Islamic Jihad, providing them with financial and military assistance. Tehran views its involvement as part of a broader strategy to counter Israeli and U.S. influence in the region. This role intensifies the proxy nature of the conflict, linking it to broader Middle Eastern rivalries. Recent intelligence reports suggest Iran has increased its shipments of weapons to Hamas via clandestine routes, leveraging regional instability. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has called for the liberation of Palestine, further polarizing relations with Israel and its allies. Other regional actors, Egypt and Jordan, both nations have peace treaties with Israel and often mediate during escalations, though their influence is limited. Egypt has played a crucial role in brokering ceasefires, while Jordan continues to advocate for Palestinian rights at international forums. Saudi Arabia recently engaged in normalization talks with Israel, though public opinion in the Arab world remains largely pro-Palestinian. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman faces a delicate balancing act as he seeks closer ties with Israel without alienating domestic and regional audiences. Turkey, a vocal critic of Israeli policies, particularly under President Erdogan, Turkey supports Palestinian aspirations but maintains economic ties with Israel. Erdogan's fiery rhetoric often contrasts with behind-the-scenes diplomacy. Russia and China both have positioned themselves as counterweights to U.S. dominance in the region. Russia's support for Syria indirectly affects the conflict, while China's growing economic ties in the Middle East include calls for a multilateral approach to peace. Key personalities in the conflict: 1. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel. As Israel's prime minister, Netanyahu's policies have prioritized security and expanded settlements, drawing international criticism. His government's hardline stance, including judicial reforms and increased military operations, complicates peace efforts. 2. Yahya Sinwar, Hamas. The leader of Hamas in Gaza, Sinwar represents the militant resistance against Israel. His leadership has overseen both armed confrontations and attempts at ceasefires, but remains committed to opposing Israeli occupation. 3. Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian Authority. The aging president of the Palestinian Authority faces declining legitimacy, with critics accusing him of being ineffective against Israeli occupation and disconnected from younger Palestinians. Abbas's inability to hold elections has further eroded confidence in his leadership. 4. Joe Biden, United States. As president, Biden has reaffirmed U.S. support for Israel while advocating for a two-state solution, though with limited actionable results. His administration's challenge lies in balancing domestic political pressures with international diplomacy. 5. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran. Iran's supreme leader sees opposition to Israel as a cornerstone of his foreign policy, framing the conflict as a moral and strategic imperative. 6. Ibrahim Raisi, Iran. The Iranian president's vocal support for Palestinian resistance movements underscores Tehran's active role in the conflict. Humanitarian and emotional aspects. The human toll of the conflict is staggering. Thousands of lives have been lost, including children, and countless others have been displaced. Families live in perpetual fear, with the trauma of airstrikes, raids, and rocket attacks shaping daily existence. In Gaza, the blockade has turned the region into what many describe as an open-air prison, where basic survival is a daily struggle. Conversely, Israeli civilians live under the constant threat of rocket fire and terrorist attacks, creating a pervasive sense of insecurity. Both populations have deep-seated grievances, and generations have grown up knowing nothing but conflict, making reconciliation a monumental challenge. Economic dimensions. The conflict has profound economic implications for Palestinians. The blockade on Gaza has devastated the economy, with unemployment exceeding 50%. Access to essential goods is restricted, and international aid often struggles to reach those in need. For Israelis, military expenditures and security concerns impose significant economic burdens. While Israel's economy remains robust, the cost of maintaining its military and counterterrorism measures is substantial. Media and propaganda media coverage of the conflict is highly polarized. Israeli narratives emphasize self-defense and security, while Palestinian accounts highlight human rights violations and occupation. Social media has amplified these narratives, often spreading misinformation and fueling tensions. Pathways to resolution. Experts emphasize that a lasting solution requires addressing root causes. 1. End to occupation. The international community must push for an end to Israeli occupation and settlement expansion. 2. Humanitarian aid. Immediate efforts are needed to alleviate Gaza's suffering through aid and lifting the blockade. 3. Inclusive dialogue. Both Israeli and Palestinian leaders must engage in meaningful negotiations with international mediation. 4. Accountability. Both sides must be held accountable for violations of international law to build trust and ensure justice. 5. Grassroots movements. Empowering civil society initiatives that promote dialogue and coexistence can pave the way for grassroots-level reconciliation. Conclusion. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a deeply entrenched issue with no easy solutions. While historical grievances, political ideologies, and external interventions complicate the path to peace, the immense human suffering demands urgent action. Both sides must prioritize dialogue and compromise over violence to achieve a future where Israelis and Palestinians can coexist peacefully. The international community, particularly influential nations like the U.S. and Iran, must play a constructive role in facilitating this process. Final thoughts. As of November 2024, the conflict's trajectory underscores the urgency of comprehensive international intervention. Without addressing the underlying issues of occupation, inequality,